The sun poured through the tall windows of the practice room, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Maylin's fingers trembled slightly as she held her trumpet. 22 years old and in her final year at Juilliard, she still couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong there. Around her, the sounds of other students practicing filled the air, confident, bold, and precise. Her own playing, though technically solid, always seemed to lack something she couldn't quite name. Again, she whispered to herself, raising the trumpet to her lips. The piece wasn't particularly difficult, not for someone who had been playing since she was 8. But every time she reached the middle section, something inside her tightened. Her breath would become shallow, her fingers stiff, and the music would fall apart. Outside the practice room, life in New York City continued its relentless pace. Yellow taxis honked, pedestrians hurried past each other without making eye contact, and street vendors called out to potential customers. But inside this room, time seemed to stand still as Maylene faced the same battle she had been fighting for years, the battle against her own doubt. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate. "Don't forget Robert Wells' masterclass at 2. Maylene glanced at the clock and sighed. Robert Wells, the living legend of jazz trumpet, winner of 9 Grammy Awards, collaborator with every big name in the business, and now, apparently, someone who was going to listen to her play and judge her worth. The thought made her stomach twist into knots. "Just skip it," said a familiar voice in her head. "You're not ready. You'll embarrass yourself." But Professor Chen would notice if she wasn't there, and after all the extra help he had given her, all the times he had stayed late to work with her when panic seized her during lessons, she couldn't let him down. With reluctant hands, she packed up her trumpet, tucked her sheet music into her bag, and headed for the main auditorium. The hallways were already buzzing with excitement. Students huddled in small groups, talking in hushed, reverent tones about the man who had redefined trumpet playing for a generation. "I heard he made a student at Berkeley cry last month," whispered a tall boy with glasses as Maylene passed. "That's nothing," replied his friend. "My cousin attended his workshop in Chicago, and Wells told some guy to switch to tuba because his embouchure was beyond saving." Maylene's pace slowed. Maybe she could say she was sick. Maybe she could— There you are. Professor Chen appeared beside her, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. At 64, he still carried himself with the energy of a much younger man, a reminder of his own days as a touring musician. "I saved you a seat near the front. I'm not playing today, am I?" Maylene asked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. Professor Chen shook his head. No, today is just observation, though Wells did mention he might ask for volunteers." Seeing her expression, he added quickly, "But there are plenty of students who would jump at that chance. Don't worry." The auditorium was nearly full by the time they found their seats. On stage, a baby grand piano gleamed under the lights alongside a drum set, bass, and music stand. The room hummed with anticipation. At precisely 2 p.m., the side door opened and Robert Wells walked in. The room fell silent. He wasn't what Maylene had expected. From his recordings and the few videos she'd seen, she had imagined someone larger than life, intimidating in his brilliance. But the man who walked onto the stage was surprisingly ordinary in appearance. Medium height, with silver-streaked black hair and the slight slouch of someone who had spent decades hunched over his instrument. Only his eyes gave away who he really was. Sharp, observant, missing nothing. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying easily without a microphone. "I'm not big on formalities, so let's get to it. I'm here because your dean is an old friend who called in a favor. I'm also here because, despite what the internet might tell you, I actually care about what happens to this art form after I'm gone." He picked up his trumpet, not the custom-made one he used for recordings, but a well-worn instrument that looked like it had survived thousands of performances. Most of you think you know what makes a good trumpet player. You think it's about technique, how fast you can play, how high, how clean your articulation is. He played a blindingly fast scale that stretched into a register that made several students gasp. And yes, you need that. Then, without warning, he played a single note, a middle C, the most basic note any beginner learns. But the way he played it, the richness, the depth, the way it seemed to fill not just the room but something inside everyone who heard it, made it sound completely new. "But this," he said after letting the note fade, "this is what separates the musicians from the technicians. This is what's missing from most of what I hear these days. For the next hour, he worked with 3 student volunteers, all of whom Maylene recognized as the stars of the department. Each played impressively, and Wells offered specific technical advice that displayed his mastery of the instrument. But with each student, he eventually reached the same conclusion. "You're playing all the right notes," he told a boy named David, who had just finished a technically flawless rendition of a difficult piece. "But I don't believe you. I don't know who you are after hearing that. I don't know what matters to you, what breaks your heart, what makes you get out of bed in the morning. Without that, it's just organized noise." From her seat, Maylene watched the color rise in David's face. He was widely considered the most promising trumpet player in the program, destined for a major orchestra position after graduation. "Now," Wells said, setting down his trumpet and looking out at the audience, "who here composes their own music? Not just exercises, but real pieces that mean something to you?" A few hands went up around the auditorium. Maylene kept hers firmly in her lap, even though she had been composing her own pieces since childhood. They were private, personal, not something she wanted to share, especially not with someone like Wells. Professor Chen, however, had other ideas. "Maylene," he said, loud enough for Wells to hear, "you should raise your hand." Wells's sharp eyes found her immediately. "You compose?" "Just small things," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. "Nothing important. Play something for me," he said. It wasn't a request. "I don't have the music with me," she tried, her heart pounding. "Good," Wells replied. "If you need sheet music for your own composition, you haven't composed anything worth playing." The room had gone completely still. Maylene felt everyone's eyes on her, some curious, others relieved it wasn't them being called out, a few clearly enjoying her discomfort. "I really don't think," she began. "That's the problem with your generation," Wells interrupted. "Too much thinking, not enough feeling. Too concerned with what others might say, with following the rules." He gestured impatiently toward the stage. "Play something true or don't bother playing at all." Maylene looked desperately at Professor Chen, who gave her an encouraging nod. With legs that felt disconnected from her body, she made her way to the stage, trumpet clutched tightly in her hand. Up close, Wells was even more intimidating. Those piercing eyes seemed to see right through her, past all her carefully constructed defenses. "What's your name?" he asked as she reached the stage. "Maylene Wu," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "Well, Maylene Wu, show me what that trumpet means to you." She raised the instrument to her lips, her mind completely blank. What could she possibly play that wouldn't sound ridiculous to Robert Wells? Every piece she knew suddenly seemed childish, simple, unworthy. Then, without conscious decision, she began to play a melody that had been forming in her mind for months. A melody about her grandmother's village in China, a place she had visited only once as a child, but that lived vividly in her imagination. It was a simple tune built around a pentatonic scale, with spaces between phrases that felt like breaths, like memories surfacing and submerging. She played with her eyes closed, forgetting where she was, forgetting who was listening. The melody evolved as she played, taking on new shapes, exploring paths she hadn't considered before. There was longing in it and joy and a kind of quiet resilience that reminded her of her grandmother's hands, wrinkled but strong, gentle but capable. When she finally opened her eyes, the auditorium was silent. Wells was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "That," he said after a long moment, "had truth in it." Then his expression hardened. "But you're hiding. You're playing at about 60% of what you're capable of because you're afraid." Before she could respond, he turned to address the entire room. "2 weeks from today, I'm performing at Carnegie Hall. My last piece will be a duet, a musical conversation between 2 trumpets." He pointed directly at May. "Lynn, this young woman will be my partner for that piece." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Carnegie Hall, Robert Wells, a duet. It was unthinkable. "Mr. Wells," Maylene managed to say, "I can't possibly—" "Can't?" He cut her off. "Or won't? There's a difference, and it matters." He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "That melody has something real in it, but you're holding back because you're scared, of judgment, of failure, of standing out. I'm giving you a chance to get past that fear, to play with everything you have." He paused, then added, "Or you can stay safe and small. Your choice." Then louder, addressing the whole room again. 2 weeks, Carnegie Hall. be there or admit that you've been wasting your time and mine. And just like that, Mei Lin's world turned upside down. Mei Lin couldn't remember leaving the auditorium. She had a vague memory of stunned faces, of whispers following her like shadows, of Professor Chen's hand on her shoulder guiding her through hallways that suddenly seemed too narrow, too crowded. But the next clear moment in her mind was sitting on a bench outside the building, staring at pigeons pecking at discarded sandwich crusts, her trumpet case heavy on her lap. "Breathe," Professor Chen said, sitting beside her. "Just breathe." "I can't do it," she whispered, her voice thin and shaky. "Carnegie Hall? With Robert Wells? It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Professor Chen replied, the afternoon sun highlighting the silver in his hair. "Difficult, yes. Terrifying, absolutely. But not impossible." Her phone buzzed, the first of what would soon become an avalanche of messages. News of Wells's challenge was already spreading through the school's gossip channels with lightning speed. "Everyone will be watching," she said, the thought making her chest tighten. "Waiting for me to fail." Professor Chen was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember why you started playing?" he finally asked. The question caught her off guard. Why had she started? It had been so long ago. Her father bringing home a second-hand trumpet when she was 8, after she had been mesmerized by a street musician in Chinatown. The weight of it in her small hands, the way the brass warmed to her touch, the discovery that she could create something beautiful with just her breath and fingertips. "Because it felt like magic," she said softly. "Find that again," Professor Chen said. "Before you worry about Carnegie Hall or Robert Wells or what anyone else thinks, find the magic again." Later that night, Mei Lin sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by textbooks she couldn't focus on, while her roommate Zoe paced excitedly around their small apartment. "This is huge," Zoe kept saying, her curly hair bouncing with each emphatic gesture. "Do you realize how huge this is? People would kill for this opportunity. Wells never does this kind of thing. Maybe he just wanted to humiliate me in front of a bigger audience," Mei Lin said, only half joking. Zoe stopped pacing and put her hands on her hips. "Okay, enough with the pity party. Robert Wells, the Robert Wells, heard something in your playing that made him invite you to perform at Carnegie Hall." Carnegie Hall. She emphasized each word as if Mei Lin might have misunderstood. "You can freak out, you can be nervous, but you don't get to pretend this isn't the opportunity of a lifetime." Mei Lin's phone rang, her mother calling from San Francisco. The news had traveled fast. "Mei Lin," her mother's voice came through, a mixture of concern and pride. "Your father just called from the restaurant. His friend's son saw on Instagram that you're performing with Robert Wells." "Is this true?" "It's complicated, Mom." "What does that mean, complicated?" "Either you are playing with him or you are not," Mei Lin sighed. Her mother had always dealt in certainties. Yes or no, right or wrong, success or failure. There was no room for the messy in-between spaces where Mei Lin often found herself. "He challenged me to a duet at Carnegie Hall. But I don't think I can do it." There was silence on the other end. Then her mother's voice softer now. "Why not?" It was such a simple question, but Mei Lin had no simple answer. "Because I'm not good enough? Because I'm scared? Because if I fail in front of everyone, I'll never recover?" "I don't know," she finally said. "Listen to me," her mother said, and Mei Lin could picture her sitting up straighter, the way she always did when imparting important wisdom. "Your grandfather left everything behind to come to this country with nothing but a suitcase and his determination. Your father worked 16-hour days to build his business while learning English from cookbooks. We did not overcome all of that for you to say 'I don't know' when opportunity knocks." It wasn't the pep talk Mei Lin had expected, but it was exactly what her mother would say. No sugarcoating, no gentle encouragement, just the unvarnished family history that was both a burden and an inspiration. "I'll try," Mei Lin promised, though the words felt hollow. "Don't try." "Decide," her mother replied. "Decide that you will do it, and then do it." The next morning, Mei Lin woke to find that someone had slipped a note under her apartment door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp, slanted, decisive. "Blue Note Jazz Club. Come alone." Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. Robert Wells wanted to meet her, today? She glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. Just enough time to shower, change, and make it downtown if she hurried. The Blue Note was closed when she arrived, The neon sign dark, chairs still stacked on tables visible through the windows. Maylin checked the address again, wondering if she had misunderstood, when a side door opened, and a woman with close-cropped gray hair gestured for her to come in. "He's downstairs," the woman said without introduction. "Watch the third step, it's loose." The basement of the Blue Note was nothing like the polished performance space upstairs. Low ceilings, exposed pipes, concrete floors. It felt more like a bunker than part of a famous jazz club. At the far end, a single light illuminated a small table where Robert Wells sat, his trumpet disassembled in front of him, carefully cleaning each piece. He didn't look up when she entered. "You're on time, good. I hate waiting." Maylin stood awkwardly, unsure whether to sit down, speak, or simply wait for instructions. After what felt like an eternity, Wells finally looked at her. "Why do you play like you're apologizing for taking up space?" he asked bluntly. The question stung, partly because it hit so close to home. She had never put that feeling into words, but he had captured it perfectly. Every time she played, there was a part of her that felt she needed to apologize. For not being as good as others thought she should be. For daring to make noise in a world that hadn't asked for it. "I don't know," she said, echoing her response to her mother. Wells reassembled his trumpet with quick, practiced movements. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a chair across from him. She sat, placing her own trumpet case carefully on the floor beside her. 2 weeks, he said. "That's what we've got. Not enough time to fix all your technical issues. Definitely not enough time to rebuild your confidence from scratch. So we're going to focus on one thing only, teaching you to play the truth." "The truth?" Maylin repeated, confused. "Everyone can play notes. Few can play the truth." He raised his trumpet and played a phrase, simple, bluesy, nothing flashy, but something in it reached right into her chest and squeezed. "That's truth. That's saying something real through your instrument." For the next 2 hours, Wells pushed her harder than anyone ever had. He made her play the same phrase over and over, stopping her constantly, demanding more emotion, more honesty, more risk. He was harsh, impatient, and occasionally cruel in his assessments. But underneath it all, Maylin sensed something unexpected. He actually cared whether she improved or not. "Again," he said for what felt like the 100th time. "And stop thinking about how you sound. Nobody cares how pretty it is if it doesn't have any guts behind it." Maylin's lips were getting sore, her fingers stiff. But she raised the trumpet again and played the phrase, trying to put some unnamed feeling into the notes. "Better," Wells said, the first hint of approval he had shown all morning. Still hiding, but better. As she packed up to leave, he handed her a piece of paper with handwritten music on it. A melody she didn't recognize, complex and challenging. "Learn this," he said. "It's half of what we'll play at Carnegie. The rest will be conversation, back and forth, call and response. You answering me answering you. What should I practice for that part?" she asked, studying the difficult notation. Wells looked at her as if she had asked the color of the sky. "You don't practice conversation. You just have it. That's the whole point. Being present enough to actually hear what the other person is saying and respond honestly." He paused. "Can you do that, Maylin? Can you be present enough to have a real conversation through your trumpet?" She didn't know the answer, but something in her was changing. The challenge awakening a determination she hadn't known she possessed. "Yes," she said, surprised by the firmness in her voice. "I can." Wells studied her face, then nodded once. "We'll see. Same time tomorrow." It wasn't a question. As Maylin emerged from the basement into the bright morning light, she felt different. Shaken, exhausted, but somehow more solid than before. The streets of New York seemed both louder and more distant, as if she were moving through the world with a new kind of awareness. Her phone had 17 missed calls and dozens of messages, classmates looking for gossip, journalists seeking interviews, even a few professional musicians who had somehow gotten her number. She ignored them all and called only one person. "Professor Chen, I need help. I'm doing the Carnegie performance, and I have a lot of work to do." The days began to blur together for Maylin. Each morning started before dawn with warm-up exercises in the apartment bathroom, the only place where she wouldn't disturb neighbors, followed by classes she barely registered, then hours at the Blue Note with Wells, and finally late-night practice sessions with Professor Chen. Sleep became a luxury, food an afterthought. Your embouchure is collapsing, Wells told her on day 5, stopping her mid-phrase. You need to rest. I'm fine, she insisted, though her lips were swollen and her cheeks ached. You won't be fine if you blow out your chops before the performance, Wells countered. He set down his trumpet with a sigh. This isn't just about endurance, Mei Lin. This is about knowing when to push and when to rest. Music needs space to breathe. So do musicians. It was the gentlest he had been with her so far. Somehow, that kindness cracked something open in her, and to her horror she felt tears welling up. I can't afford to rest, she said, hating the tremor in her voice. Everyone's watching. Everyone's waiting for me to fail. Wells studied her for a long moment. Do you know why I challenged you? She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. To teach me a lesson? To make an example of me? Because I heard myself in your playing, he said simply. Not the technique. That needs work, obviously. But that melody you played, I heard the same hunger I felt at your age, the same need to say something true. He leaned forward. But I also heard the fear. And let me tell you, fear is the death of good music. It's been killing jazz one note at a time for years now. So what do? Mei Lin asked. How do I not be afraid in front of all those people? You don't, Wells replied. You're going to be terrified. Accept that now. A half smile crossed his face. And then you play anyway because the music matters more than the fear. The next day, Wells didn't make her play at all. Instead, he took her record shopping. They spent hours in dusty vinyl shops. Wells pulling albums she'd never heard of, playing them on in-store turntables, making her listen, really listen, to how the great trumpet players of the past approached their art. Hear how Clifford Brown bends that note? He'd say. Or, listen to the way Miles uses silence here. The notes he doesn't play are as important as the ones he does. As they walked between shops, coffee cups warming their hands against the October chill, Wells told stories from his own early days, sleeping on friends' couches, playing for tips in subway stations, getting thrown out of clubs for trying to sit in with the professionals. I wasn't a natural, he admitted, surprising her. Not like some. I had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. But I was stubborn. And I had something to say. Mei Lin realized this was the first normal conversation they'd had, musician to musician, human to human, without the pressure of the trumpet between them. Why did you stop collaborating with new artists? She asked, emboldened by this new dynamic. Wells had been notorious for mentoring young musicians earlier in his career. But for the past decade, he had worked almost exclusively with his long-established quartet. Something shifted in his expression, a shadow of something like regret. Got tired of disappointment, he said after a long pause. Too many bright young things more interested in fame than the music itself. Too many followers, not enough leaders. And you think I'm different? Mei Lin asked. Wells glanced sideways at her. I think you could be, if you get out of your own way. When they returned to practicing the next day, something had changed. The dynamic between them had shifted, not exactly friendly, but with a new layer of understanding. Wells was still demanding, still pushed her to her limits, but there was context for his harshness now. She could see it wasn't personal. It was about the music. 1 week before the performance, disaster struck. Mei Lin woke up with a throbbing pain in her throat, her body aching, her head pounding. She dragged herself to the bathroom mirror to find her tonsils swollen and red. No, she moaned, reaching for her phone with shaking hands to call Wells. Rest. Fluids. Silence, he ordered, when she croaked out her symptoms. Complete vocal and trumpet rest. Not a single note until tomorrow at the earliest. Panic clawed at her chest. But we only have 7 days left, and we'll have 0 if you blow out your throat. He cut her off. This isn't negotiable. Mei Lin spent the day in miserable silence, alternating between sleeping and worrying, watching instructional videos with the sound off, and fingering her trumpet without actually playing it. By evening, the fever had broken, but her anxiety had only grown. A knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Zoe standing there with Professor Chen and, to her shock, her parents. Surprise, Zoe said. I might have called in reinforcements. Mei Lin's mother rushed forward to feel her forehead. You're sick? Why didn't you call us? Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? Her father, still in his restaurant clothes, dark pants and a button-up shirt that smelled faintly of ginger and garlic, smiled tiredly. You think we would miss your big moment? We closed the restaurant for a week. First time in 15 years. The realization of what that meant, the cost, the lost business, the unprecedented break in their routine, made Mei Lin's eyes fill with tears again. Her mother immediately began unpacking containers of homemade kanji, medicinal teas, and throat lozenges, while her father settled into the apartment's only armchair as if he'd always belonged there. "Mr. Wells called us," her mother explained, pressing a cup of steaming tea into Mei Lin's hands. "He said you were working too hard and needed family. So here we are." The thought of Wells, gruff, demanding Wells, calling her parents made Mei Lin's head spin, but as she sat surrounded by the people who believed in her most, sipping her mother's healing tea, she felt something unlock in her chest. The fear was still there, but it no longer seemed to take up all the space. The next morning her throat was better, not perfect, but functional. Wells insisted they move practice to her apartment so she could continue resting between sessions. The sight of the famous trumpeter in her tiny living room, ducking to avoid hitting his head on the low-hanging light fixture, was surreal enough. But watching him interact with her parents was something else entirely. Her father, it turned out, had been a fan since college. He shyly brought out an ancient, battered CD he'd carried all the way from San Francisco, Wells's first album, now out of print. Wells not only signed it, but spent nearly an hour talking with her father about the recording sessions, the musicians he'd worked with, the clubs that no longer existed. Her mother was less impressed by fame but keenly interested in Wells's teaching methods. "You think my daughter has talent?" she asked bluntly, in the direct way that had mortified Mei Lin throughout her childhood. "I think your daughter has something to say," Wells replied, matching her directness. "Whether she'll have the courage to say it, that's what we're working on." That afternoon they finally ran through the entire Carnegie Hall piece from beginning to end. The composition Wells had written was challenging but beautiful, full of unexpected turns and spaces for improvisation. Mei Lin's part wove in and out of his, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in counterpoint, like a conversation between two distinct voices. When they finished, there was a moment of silence. Then her father began to applaud, followed by her mother and Professor Chen. "It's not perfect," Wells said, ever the taskmaster, "but it's honest. That counts for more." 2 days before the performance, they moved rehearsals to Carnegie Hall itself, practicing on the stage where they would soon perform. The first time Mei Lin walked into the empty hall, she froze. The space was simultaneously larger and more intimate than she had imagined. Over 2,800 seats rising up in elegant tiers. The acoustics so perfect that Wells could stand on stage and speak to her in the back row without raising his voice. "Breathe it in," he told her. "Make friends with the space now so it won't be a stranger on Friday night." They played softly at first, getting used to how their sounds carried in the hall. Then louder, with more confidence. Wells's quartet joined them for the last hour, the full arrangement taking shape around their trumpet conversation. After everyone else had left, Mei Lin stood alone on the stage, looking out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with people, critics, musicians, fans, her fellow students, her family. The thought still terrified her, but something had shifted inside her. The fear no longer felt like an obstacle, but like energy she could use, channel, transform. "Hey," called Wells from the back of the hall. "You coming? We've got one more day of practice." Mei Lin took one last look at the empty hall, then nodded. "I'm ready," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The day of the performance arrived with a sky so brilliantly blue it seemed painted rather than real. Mei Lin woke before her alarm, her heart already racing. Today was the day. Carnegie Hall, Robert Wells. No more practice. No more preparation. Just the moment itself. Waiting for her. She went through her morning ritual slowly, deliberately, warm water with lemon for her throat, gentle stretches for her neck and shoulders, breathing exercises Professor Chen had taught her years ago. Her trumpet sat in its open case on the kitchen table, catching the early morning light. Her parents moved quietly around the apartment, her mother making breakfast no one would eat, her father reading yesterday's newspaper with intense focus, the weight of the day pressed down on all of them. Mei Lin's phone buzzed with a text from Wells. 3 things only today: rest, hydrate, trust, trust. Such a simple word for such a difficult concept. Trust the music. Trust Wells, trust yourself. The last one felt like the biggest stretch of all. By mid-afternoon, Mei Lin and her parents had made their way to Carnegie Hall through streets clogged with Friday traffic. A small crowd of music students had gathered near the artist's entrance, some holding signs of support, others just curious to catch a glimpse of the drama that had become the talk of the music world. Mei Lin called a voice and she turned to see Zoe pushing through the crowd, waving excitedly. Everyone from school is coming tonight. Professor Chen reserved a whole section. The thought of all those eyes, all those opinions made Mei Lin's stomach clench. She managed a weak smile and a wave before ducking through the stage door, her parents following close behind. Backstage was controlled chaos, technicians checking microphones, Wells's quartet warming up in a practice room, venue staff rushing back and forth with clipboards and headsets. In a quiet corner, Wells himself sat alone, eyes closed, trumpet resting in his lap, fingers moving slightly as if playing invisible keys. He opened his eyes as Mei Lin approached. "Right on time," he said with approval. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," she admitted. "Good," he nodded. "Use it." Terror and exhilaration are close cousins. Same physical responses, different mental labels. A stagehand appeared to guide Mei Lin's parents to their seats, leaving her alone with Wells. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the hall filtered around them. The murmur of the gathering audience, the tuning of instruments, the soft tapping of a drum being adjusted. "I have something for you," Wells said finally, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small worn object, a mouthpiece old and tarnished but clearly well-loved. "This was given to me by my first real teacher," he explained, placing it in her palm. "He got it from his teacher, who played with Louis Armstrong back in the day. I've used it for every important performance of my life." He paused. "I want you to use it tonight." Mei Lin stared at the mouthpiece in shock. For a trumpet player, a mouthpiece was intensely personal, like a singer lending someone their vocal cords. "I can't take this," she whispered. "You're not taking it," Wells corrected. "You're borrowing it. For luck." A rare smile crossed his face, and as a reminder that you're part of something bigger than yourself. A conversation that's been going on for generations. Tonight you add your voice to that conversation. Before she could respond, the stage manager appeared. "5 minutes, Mr. Wells." Wells nodded, then looked back at Mei Lin. "Remember what we've worked on. Listen more than you play. Don't think about the audience. And when in doubt, tell the truth," she finished for him. "Exactly." He rose to his feet, suddenly every inch the legend that had intimidated her 2 weeks ago. "See you out there." The first half of the concert was a blur for Mei Lin, watching from the wings as Wells and his quartet played their regular program. They were brilliant, of course, tight, innovative, responsive to each other in that telepathic way that only comes from years of playing together. The audience responded with increasing enthusiasm, the energy in the hall building with each piece. During intermission, Mei Lin sat in a small dressing room, carefully replacing her usual mouthpiece with Wells's loner. It felt different against her lips, the edge worn smooth by decades of use, the cup slightly shallower than she was used to. She played a few soft notes, getting acquainted with its quirks. A knock at the door startled her. Her mother entered, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "You don't have to do this," she said without preamble. "We can walk away right now. Go back to San Francisco. Find another school." Mei Lin looked up in surprise. "What?" Her mother sat beside her, hands twisting in her lap. "I pushed you too hard. Your whole life I pushed. Excellence, always excellence, never allowing failure." She took a shaky breath. "But seeing you these past days, how hard you've worked, how much pressure you're under, I realize I never asked if this was what you truly wanted." "Mom," Mei Lin said gently, "I'm scared, but I want to be here. This is my choice." Her mother studied her face, then nodded once decisively. "Then go show them who you are." She reached out to smooth a strand of hair behind Mei Lin's ear, a gesture so tender it brought tears to Mei Lin's eyes. "Your grandfather would be so proud." When the 5-minute call came, Mei Lin made her way to the stage entrance. Wells was already there, looking completely at ease. "Ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "Ready?" Wells walked onto the stage first to thunderous applause. He adjusted the microphone and addressed the packed hall. "Tonight's final piece is different from what you might expect," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly to the farthest seats. It's not just a performance, it's a conversation. A question and an answer, a challenge and a response. He gestured toward the wings. Please welcome Mei-Lin Wu. The applause as she walked on stage was polite but reserved, tinged with curiosity. Mei-Lin felt the weight of thousands of gazes as she took her place beside Wells. The stage lights were blinding, making the audience a dark, faceless mass beyond the first few rows. Somehow that helped. They weren't individuals to impress or disappoint, just a presence like the ocean. Wells nodded to the quartet, who began a gentle, understated backdrop of rhythm and harmony. Then he raised his trumpet and played the opening phrase, a question musical yet somehow plaintive, reaching out into the darkness, and then it was her turn. In that moment, all the practice, all the fear, all the doubts seemed to fall away. Mei-Lin raised her trumpet, felt the borrowed mouthpiece against her lips, and played her answer. Not the answer she had rehearsed, but the one that rose naturally from somewhere deep inside her. Honest, vulnerable, real. Wells's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. He played again, more challenging this time, pushing the boundaries of the composition. Mei-Lin followed, matching his intensity, adding her own perspective. Back and forth they went, the conversation deepening, becoming more personal with each exchange. Mei-Lin forgot about the audience, forgot about Carnegie Hall, forgot about her parents and Professor Chen and her fellow students. There was only the music, the give and take, the question and answer, the challenge and response. For the first time in her life, she wasn't playing to impress or to avoid criticism. She was playing to communicate something true. The quartet adapted around them, supporting without intruding, as the musical dialogue grew more complex. At times they played together, harmonizing perfectly. At others they diverged into counterpoint, two distinct voices expressing different perspectives on the same musical idea. When they reached the final section, the part they had practiced most carefully, Wells departed from the script, taking the music in an unexpected direction. For a split second, panic flashed through Mei-Lin. This wasn't what they had rehearsed. This wasn't safe. Then she remembered. Listen more than you play. Don't think about the audience. And when in doubt, tell the truth. So she did. She followed where Wells led, then took the lead herself, bringing the conversation to places neither of them had explored before. She played what she felt. Her journey of the past 2 weeks, her fears, her growth, her gratitude. She played for her parents and their sacrifices, for Professor Chen's unwavering belief, for Wells's tough love mentoring. Most of all, she played for herself, the self she was discovering she could be. As they approached the final notes, their eyes met across the stage. Wells gave her the slightest nod, acknowledgement, approval, respect. Together, they brought the piece to its conclusion, their last notes fading into a perfect resonant silence. 1 heartbeat. 2. The hall held its breath. Then the audience erupted. Applause, cheers, whistles, some even rising to their feet. The sound washed over Mei-Lin like a wave, but strangely, it didn't matter as much as she had thought it would. What mattered was what had passed between her and Wells, between her and the music. What mattered was the truth she had finally allowed herself to speak. Wells stepped forward and, to her shock, bowed to her before gesturing for her to take a bow of her own. As she did, she caught sight of her parents in the 3rd row, her father openly weeping, her mother standing tall, hands clasped over her heart. Not bad, Wells murmured as they took another bow together. Not bad at all. Coming from him, it was the highest praise imaginable. Mei-Lin smiled, really smiled, for what felt like the first time in years. The morning after the Carnegie Hall performance, Mei-Lin woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the unfamiliar sensation of complete peace. For a moment she lay still, wondering if it had all been a dream. The lights, the music, the applause. Then she spotted Wells's mouthpiece on her nightstand, and reality rushed back. It had happened. She had played Carnegie Hall with Robert Wells, and she had not just survived but thrived. Her phone buzzed with notifications, hundreds of them. Messages from classmates, from distant relatives who had seen videos online, from strangers who had somehow found her social media accounts. The performance had been recorded and clips were already circulating, shared by audience members and music lovers around the world. In the kitchen, she found her parents and Zoe huddled around Zoe's laptop, reading something with intense focus. "What are you looking at?" Mei-Lin asked, pouring herself a cup of the jasmine tea her mother had brewed. They exchanged glances and Zoe turned the screen toward her. "The New York Times review," she said. "It just went online." Maylin's heart skipped. Music critics, especially those from major publications, could make or break careers with a few well-placed words. She had completely forgotten that critics would be in the audience. "Do I want to know?" she asked, only half joking. Her father's eyes were bright. "Read it," he urged, taking a deep breath. Maylin began to read. In a musical landscape often dominated by technical perfection at the expense of emotional depth, last night's performance at Carnegie Hall was a revelatory reminder of what jazz, at its core, has always been about: conversation, connection, and truth-telling through sound. Robert Wells, long established as one of America's premier trumpet players, took a risk that paid off magnificently. His musical dialogue with Juilliard student Maylin Wu transcended the gimmick it might have been, evolving instead into one of the most genuine musical exchanges this critic has witnessed in years. Ms. Wu, initially showing the understandable nerves of a student thrust onto one of the world's most prestigious stages, quickly revealed herself to be not merely a skilled technician, but a musician with something meaningful to say. The vulnerability in her playing, the willingness to take risks even when they didn't all succeed, provided a fascinating counterpoint to Wells's more polished expertise. What emerged was not a master class or a student recital, but a genuine conversation between artists at different stages of their journeys, each with unique perspectives, each listening and responding to the other with remarkable honesty. If this performance is any indication, Ms. Wu represents a hopeful direction for a new generation of jazz musicians, one that values personal expression over technical flash, emotional truth over crowd-pleasing pyrotechnics. As for Wells, this collaboration seems to have reawakened something in his playing that has been missing in recent years. A freshness, a willingness to be surprised, a rediscovered joy in the unpredictable nature of true jazz improvisation. The review continued, but Maylin couldn't read anymore through her tears. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. "They understood," Maylin whispered. "They actually understood what we were trying to do." "Of course they did," her father said proudly. "How could they not?" The buzz around the performance didn't fade in the days that followed. Maylin received emails from record labels, invitations to perform at clubs and festivals, even a few scholarship offers from graduate programs. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and more than a little frightening. 3 days after the concert, she met Wells at the Blue Note one last time. He sat at the same basement table where they had spent so many hours practicing. But the atmosphere was different now, more relaxed, the mentor-student dynamic shifting into something closer to colleagues. "You've been busy," he said, nodding toward her phone, which had been buzzing nonstop with notifications. "It's crazy," she admitted. "I don't even know how to respond to half of these offers." Wells leaned back in his chair. "So what happens next, Maylin Wu? What do you want?" It was a simple question, but one she realized no one had asked her before, not her parents, not her professors, not even herself. What did she want? "I want to finish school," she said slowly, thinking it through as she spoke. "I've worked too hard to stop now. But I also want to play, really play, not just practice and perform for grades. I want to find my own voice, my own music." Wells nodded approvingly. "Good answer." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. "My manager. Tell her I sent you. She'll help you sort the worthwhile opportunities from the noise." "Thank you," Maylin said, tucking the card carefully into her wallet. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "I have something for you." She reached into her bag and pulled out his mouthpiece, wrapped carefully in a soft cloth. "This belongs with you." Wells made no move to take it. "Keep it," he said, "at least for a while. Consider it on loan until you find your sound." The gesture touched her deeply. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "For everything. These past 2 weeks have changed. Everything." "Don't thank me," Wells replied with a hint of his old gruffness. "Just don't waste it. Don't go back to playing safe. Don't let the fear creep back in." "I won't," she promised. And she meant it. 6 months later, Maylin stood in the wings of a small jazz club in the village, listening to the low murmur of the crowd as she waited to take the stage. After careful consideration, she had accepted a weekly gig here, playing with a quartet of her own. fellow students who shared her vision of music that took risks and told truths. Between these performances, her classes, and the occasional special event, she was busier than ever, but it was a different kind of busy than before. Purposeful, joyful, driven by passion rather than fear. Her parents had returned to San Francisco, but they called often, her father always eager to hear about her latest performances, her mother now asking more about her happiness than her grades. Professor Chen had become a regular at her shows, sometimes bringing other Juilliard faculty to hear what his star pupil was up to outside school. And Wells? He had embarked on a world tour shortly after their Carnegie Hall performance, but they stayed in touch through occasional emails and voice messages. He sent her recordings of obscure musicians he thought she should study, and she sent him rough demos of compositions she was working on. His feedback was always honest, sometimes brutally so, but never discouraging. Tonight was special, though. Wells was back in New York for the first time since Carnegie Hall, and he had promised to stop by. Maylin wasn't playing for his approval anymore. She had moved beyond that need, but she valued his perspective and looked forward to showing him how she had grown. The club owner approached, nodding that it was time. Maylin took a deep breath, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves but no longer fighting it. The fear was still there, just as Wells had predicted, but it had become an old acquaintance rather than an enemy. Acknowledged, respected but not allowed to take control. As she stepped onto the stage, trumpet in hand, the audience applause washed over her. In the back of the room, she spotted Wells leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching. He gave her the slightest nod, not of permission but of recognition, one musician to another. Maylin turned to her quartet, counting them in with a confident nod. Then she raised her trumpet, still using Wells's mouthpiece, though she had begun to make subtle modifications to it, making it truly her own, and began to play. The melody that emerged was something new, something she had been working on for weeks. It contained echoes of her Carnegie Hall performance, threads of her Chinese heritage, elements of classical training and jazz innovation, all woven together into something uniquely hers. It was technically challenging but emotionally direct, complex but honest. As she played, she felt that same sense of rightness, of truth-telling through music, that she had discovered on the Carnegie Hall stage. But now it wasn't a one-time miracle born of extreme pressure. It was becoming her natural state, her way of being in the world. In the months and years that followed, Maylin would face new challenges, new fears, new opportunities for growth. There would be failures and successes, moments of doubt and moments of breakthrough. The path of an artist was never straight or simple, but she never forgot the lesson of those 2 intense weeks with Robert Wells. That technical skill without emotional honesty was empty, that fear could be transformed rather than eliminated, and that the most powerful music came from the courage to speak one's truth. The Trumpet Duel that had begun as a public challenge had become something far more significant, not just a turning point in her career, but the beginning of her authentic voice as an artist and as a human being. And that changed everything.